Considering the objective and subjective cosmoses as heterogeneous spaces influenced by various formative and destructive forces and factors, the Hermetic myth introduces the concept of the horizon, Greek, choros, Egyptian, Akhet, Hebrew, Ophek, which refers to the boundary separating the part of space, whether material or psychic, where the operating laws are relatively uniform and predictable, from regions where other forces and patterns prevail. The moment consciousness begins to move away from its center, it increasingly encounters signs of other consciousnesses. The universal psychocosmos can be imagined as a field of consciousness with varying intensities, where the highest intensity corresponds to crystallization points, individual foci of consciousness. In essence, there is only an infinitely small point where consciousness is fully individual, traditionally called the spark, beyond which the unified element of the world's consciousness rages. Thus, by placing an observer at a specific point in space, one can construct a sphere around them, delimiting the area that is comprehensible and describable to that observer. This sphere is, therefore, conditionally suitable for their life and accessible to their control. It can be said that both the psyche and the objective universe represent such conditional spheres of the known, beyond which lie immeasurable realms of the unknown, the unthinkable, and the indefinable. All that is traditionally referred to as the interval or duat. The very concept of space applies to the interval only conditionally, as there is no way to measure the interworld. The process of measurement or observation immediately transforms it from a virtual state into a real one, thereby limiting it and extracting certain properties from its all-potential fabric, creating a world or its semblance. This is why the interval is simultaneously both an immeasurable space and an infinitesimally small boundary. It can be equally accurately described as having unlimited extent or as having no extent at all. At the same time, it is not entirely correct to imagine the horizon as a kind of membrane, wall or shell, something thin, two-dimensional and tangible. It would be more appropriate to describe it as a special hyperspace, a region or regions of instability, places, points, or even events that lead to contact and mutual penetration between the known, defined reality and the potential or unthinkable reality. In this sense, the horizon is simply the name for such contact itself, the act of interaction. Thus, whenever reality encounters the interval, the actual meets the potential, or the known confronts the indescribable, we can speak of interaction with the boundary. This is why the horizon is also described as a collection of gates, sha'arim, shrim, where each such gate represents an act of contact between the known and the unknown. Considering the horizon of consciousness as a permeable boundary separating daytime consciousness, the ensemble of personalities, the earth of the psychocosmos, from its deeper worlds, the infernal and celestial realms and layers, Solomonica characterizes each of its gates and their gatekeepers in various terms, identifying their different properties. Every process, every phenomenon in its progression necessarily includes a passage through the gates, that is, a phase of destabilization, a contact with the interval, without which movement would be confined to a narrow area of the manifest, the known, and would lack the potential for further development. From a magical perspective, every phenomenon can be described as the result of the action of a particular will. Thus, it can be said that any process is simultaneously the energy and action of a particular being or entity. From this standpoint, each gate is objectified in its active, volitional form as a gatekeeper, concilia, and is guarded on both sides by corresponding forces: the locking and stabilizing force, an angel, and the opening force designed to ensure the flow of energy or consciousness, a genius. Since it is evident that the ordinary functioning of consciousness is far from optimal, the most important task of the magical myth is to identify and correct the defects of consciousness. Numerous systems for describing and classifying these defects are designed to help address this problem comprehensively and globally. From this perspective, the genius of the gates represents only their ideal, potential permeability, the so-called conductor or ostiarian. In reality, the energy flow through any gate is distorted, and thus, in practice, the gates are unlocked by the so-called getic demons or kedemons. Moreover, at the level of objective reality, the energy flow through the gates is regulated by the rulers of the interval, the Archons, who are considered the primary forces responsible for the generation of this reality. It is important to understand that the Archons do not govern the laws of nature, that function belongs to another hierarchy, the gods. The rulers, instead, create the preconditions for the manifestation of these laws, establish their very possibility, and impart to them the qualities of inevitability and ultimacy. Additionally, it should be remembered that, as manifestations of the blind demiurge, Yaldabaoth, the Archons are children of ignorance, limited and obscured, which results in the destructive phenomena observed in the cosmos. From this perspective, one could say that, under real-world conditions, almost the entire external environment is shaped under the influence of the Archons, and all structures of the psyche are infected by the gatekeepers. Just as the gods, who shape and direct the manifest streams of energy, often end up as mere toys in the hands of the Archons, the creative and protective forces of consciousness struggle to emerge from under the shadow of the distractors. Similarly, while the fabric of reality is woven by the gods and the streams of possibilities are formed by angels, reality is milked by the Archons and potentials are depleted by the kedemons. It does not matter whether we regard the Archons and gatekeepers as actual entities or as destructive tendencies. What remains true is that both our consciousness and its conduits operate far from an optimal mode, dissipating or leaking significant amounts of energy. The Hermetic myth describes all the forces provoking the cosmos into inefficient existence as personal volitional entities and interacts with them accordingly. This approach is neither better nor worse than others, such as those that consider the problem more mechanistically or, conversely, more poetically. However, for those who resonate with the spirit of magic, this approach proves highly effective in identifying and minimizing the influence of destructive elements. From the perspective of Goetia, the horizon or boundary, as understood within the framework of human consciousness, is described as a complex of 72 gates through which power can flow out of the system, macro or psychocosmos. Any flow of human consciousness can manifest all 72 gates in both their positive and destructive forms. For instance, a person enslaved by rationality carries within themselves the more or less active matrix of Astaroth. However, this does not reduce the image of the archdemon to merely a set of bugs in consciousness. For a magician, these bugs represent a real figure, an agent embodying the pure essence of the given principle, to identify the open gates within oneself, through which power is lost, or, equivalently, to discover the dominion of the corresponding demon. It is crucial to understand the specific principle that the demon distorts, that is, what it hooks onto in consciousness, and what serves as its support. Once the demon is identified, there is a chance to escape its dominion by correcting the corresponding distractor and restoring consciousness to a harmonious state. From the perspective of tradition, all pathological manifestations of consciousness are merely distortions, products of the destruction of its essential innate aspirations and inclinations, and they utilize the energy of the consciousness stream itself. The cause of such distortions lies in the activation of a destructive matrix within consciousness, which relies on erroneous perceptions, obscurations, or shadows that develop as a result of inefficient functioning, energy dissipation, or the under-realization of desires and aspirations. Consequently, the Goetic system provides a body of knowledge about destructive matrices and a set of techniques for their deactivation. When a Goetic text states that the cause of a disease, vice, or other pathology of the body or consciousness is the activity of a particular demon, It refers to the activation of a corresponding destructive matrix within the stream of consciousness, not to the presence of some horned creature lurking nearby or within a person. It is the matrix that serves as the therapeutic target. The energetic cause of the pathology is concentrated within it. Distractors, obscurations, and illnesses are its consequences and supporting hooks. For each traveler, it is, of course, their own choice whether to accept the ultimate reality of mythological entities or to regard them as archetypes or patterns of consciousness. In any case, the measure of success lies in practice. How and to what extent the chosen worldview helps achieve harmony within consciousness and in its interaction with the external world, as well as how much adherence to this worldview contributes to the expansion and liberation of the individual stream of consciousness. Thus, every time consciousness operates creatively, crossing the boundary to extract new possibilities, impulses, and aspirations from the potential space of the interval, it becomes vulnerable to the kedemons. It is no coincidence that the very word kidemonos means guardians, that is, beings who manage the property of an incapacitated or immature person. The Hebrew term shomrim, shavmry, used to describe them, means guards, beings who ensure that a prisoner confined within a prison does not escape. When consciousness operates in a stationary mode, living, acting, shaping reality, and utilizing its resources, it falls under the dominion of materiality, under Hymarmene, the rule of the Archons. It is the Archons who allocate the possibilities to be realized in the worlds, in the field of reality. In other words, when consciousness interacts with the interval as a boundary, it enters the domain of the gatekeepers. When it interacts with it as the space of the interworld, or the dream world, it is within the realm of the Archon's activity. In this sense, it can be said that the gatekeepers enslave our desires, while the Archons enslave our will. This is why, in modern times, with the increasing mechanization of life, the technocratization of civilization, and the decline of creative impulses and passions, a growing share of the energy dissipated by humanity ends up in the hands of the Archons. From a practical perspective, the study of the influence, properties, and qualities of such pathological tendencies of consciousness is one of the most important aspects of the magical art, as opposing them lies at the foundation of one of its two basic strategies, the purification of consciousness and the world. However, while clear classifications, diagnostic methods, and strategies for countering kedemons, representing the distractors and pathologies of desire realization, have been developed, the preventive and remedial methods for dealing with the Archons remain underdeveloped. Whatever we may think about the reality of the Archons and their influence on energy flows in our world, we cannot ignore two significant trends in modern society: its virtualization, alongside an increasing focus on health and bodily needs. In other words, it is undeniable that humanity, as a whole, is increasingly transforming into a mass that generates a large number of diverse and unbalanced impulses of attention, merging into a noisy stream, while relying on a well-fed and often overindulged body. People produce a vast array of tendencies and incipient desires without bringing them to fruition, quickly shifting their attention from one bright lure to another. It would be short-sighted to deny that, in this process, psychic energy dissipates in enormous quantities, and an entire industry of hypercaloric nutrition has been developed to replenish it. Anyone who believes in the law of conservation of energy must ask, where exactly does all this energy go? It is precisely this pathology, this set of destructive tendencies, that tradition calls the influence of the Archons. In this terminological framework, we are forced to acknowledge that this influence is absolutely real and entirely evident. In addition to these two types of forces or matrices, errors in Goetic practice can also lead to contact with the angels of the gates, Porta Angeli. These beings, being just as non-dualistic, uncompromising, and anti-freedom as the kedemons, can inflict significant harm on the psyche of an inexperienced practitioner, because the task of the angels of the gates is to restrict contact between reality and the potential field. interaction with this group of forces offers little benefit for evolution. Angels lock reality, on the level of matter or consciousness, into its current form, thereby preventing development or even the opportunity to correct existing errors. The only situation in which contact with the portal angels might be justified is during an active demonic invasion, where it becomes necessary to firmly seal consciousness or an object to prevent it from falling under the control of destructive forces. However, even in this case, it is essential to remember that such therapy can bear unfortunate and even fatal long-term consequences. Nonetheless, if the practitioner deems such action necessary, they must compile the names of the angels to be invoked, while the names, mottos, and epithets of the Kedimons, Epikletos, and many other forces of the horizon interval are well documented and frequently tested. The nominative magic of the angels of the gates remains fragmented. In any case, it is important to understand that any situation of instability, any act of creativity, or any cognitive activity involves contact with the energies of the gates. This contact, on the one hand, offers an opportunity for expansion and development of the existing state of the world or consciousness, but on the other hand, poses the danger of its destruction or locking, depending on which forces, wills, matrices, are engaged and activated in the process. This is why it is so crucial for the magician to study the structure and functions of the gates, to understand the nature of the forces involved in them, and to grasp how these forces influence being and consciousness. Thus, the concept of the gates, as a description of the contact between beings or processes and potential reality, is not merely a convenient framework illustrating the stages and activities of this interaction. It is also a methodologically important tool for developing effective strategies for leaps across chasms, which are an integral part of any movement.